Welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. As you can see, the little Ford Ranger is back, and is missing something. So had a few issues with it, and now I've got a long day ahead of me. So let's get into it. So here is where we're at now. One engine, the original, completely torn down, and a new crate engine. So what led to all this? The little Ranger was leaking oil really heavy. We knew that. It kept progressively getting worse. So the plan was to pull that engine out, tear it down, just go through everything, reseal it, and go on and put a new clutch in it and everything while we were at it. Do it all in one go. New timing set, head gasket, valve seals, and everything. We're just gonna go top to bottom on it. Well, I pulled the head and found our oil leak. It was coming from back here on this corner of the block where the head meets the block. This gasket here was torn out and was leaking pretty bad down through here and just soaking everything, along with a few other things that were leaking on it. One, we had to have a gouge in the oil filter sealing surface. Not sure how that happened, but yeah. When I pulled the head, the guides broke off in the block, which that's not too terrible of a deal. We could get that out pretty easy. So took the head in, tore it down to check the valves out, put new valve stem seals in and all that stuff. I pulled the valves, found that the head was cracked in 3 different places between the valve seats. So started looking for a new cylinder head for it. And in my area, these engines used to be a dime a dozen. You could find them anywhere. Now they're pretty well gone. Found a new cylinder head for $700, and that would be throwing a new cylinder head on an old bottom end that had apparently been hot enough to crack the head. So didn't really want to go that route. Talked it over with the owner a good bit, and we decided to just pick up a reman long block for it. It was a little bit more expensive, but come with a 4-year unlimited mile warranty, and he needs this truck to be reliable. We thought about, or he thought about, replacing the truck, but we've already been through the suspension on it, already been through the brakes, the steering, all that stuff. We've already got a new clutch kit for it. Drive shaft's got new U-joints in it. So the only thing, and that truck's clean. It's not got any rust in it or anything like that. So other than the rear end and the transmission, there's nothing on that truck that hasn't been replaced or checked over and found to be really good. So instead of buying another vehicle with unknown maintenance history and running into a lot more problems on it, we decided to spend the money and we're going to put an engine in it. So we picked this up at O'Reilly's. They were the only one. They had 2 in stock. They shipped it out, got it to me in a week. I called around machine shops and everything trying to find a reman long block. Everyone said good luck. The few places that said, well, just drop your stuff off and we'll get a head for it and all that stuff, they were 12 months out. So we couldn't wait that long. So we picked this one up at O'Reilly's. It was $1,900 and some change. So around $2,000 plus your core charge. And we had to pick up several other parts that had already been replaced at one point on this truck. I was planning on reusing them, but to get the warranty, we had to replace water pump, hoses, belts, spark plugs, thermostat, and some other piddly stuff. Oil pump pickup had to be new. So anyways, here we are. Now, this is where we're at on it so far. I've already got the engine mounts transferred over, cleaned up the valve cover, painted it, but it's not bolted on. So everything is clean, which I was pleasantly surprised to see that it came with a melting oil pump. All the parts that I've seen on it so far are quality parts. They're not your cheap typical engine kit kind of parts. Got Gates water pump thrown on it. The timing set and everything was already put in place. So right now what we're working on doing is getting a new crank position sensor put in. The problem is the crank position sensor on these mounts down here. It's got this little mounting bracket that holds it in right here, runs off the crank pulley, like so. But the issue is the wiring for it has to pass behind this cover. And the only way to get it out far enough to fit the plug through is to remove this gear, the timing set as a whole, and this cover. I've already got it loose, like I've got the bolts loose, but cannot get it out far enough to get this back through here. So we're going to de-pin this connector, pull the wires out, and work it all up through there first, and then put the connector back on. I think that's going to be the easiest way to do it. So we're coming back together slowly but surely. Got the timing cover put on, got the water pump pulley just sit on here. The bolts are hand tight. The fan clutch has to bolt on there anyway, so not too worried about that. Got our water neck put on with new thermostat, new gasket. Got the new Velcro rubber valve cover gasket set in place. Sit it on the engine or on the head first. It's got a little tab, locks in place. Just make sure it is centered. As you can see, it's got a little channel all the way around to sit down on the head. So I like to sit the gasket down on the head first. Make sure the surface is clean. And then go on and take the time to degrease all the bolts. And use a little blue Loctite on all of them. And then torque them to spec. I'm using 85 inch-pounds. That is a little more than 7 foot-pounds. It's not much, but you don't want to crush the gasket or it'll leak. Or you can deform the valve cover because it's just sheet metal. So I'm going to set the valve cover on, Loctite all the bolts, torque them all to spec, and we should have a leak-free valve cover on this one. So we've got our valve cover bolts torqued to spec. As you can see, the gasket's not being mushroomed out or pushed out around the edges, which is what we're looking for. Nice smooth contact all the way around. And it is in the groove up front where it should be all the way around. So that should provide us a good leak-free seal. Valve cover gaskets, oil pan gaskets are super common leak points on this engine, so I want to take the time and make sure they're right. On the oil pan, I have not cleaned up the sealing surface yet that well, but I'm going to clean this groove out really well, and I've got a Velcro rubber seal for it as well. And I'll be doing the same. Probably a little red Loctite on those because the oil pan cannot come off the engine with the engine in the truck, at least not without a lot of work. And the oil pan should not be coming off of this thing anytime soon. So a little red Loctite on those and torque them to spec should give us a good seal that we don't have to worry about. No comebacks. That's what we're after. We want the customer happy, and taking a little extra time to do it right goes a long way. So what is left? We've got the exhaust manifold to put on, got the intake manifold and such to put on. I cannot put the intake on yet because I need to get this engine up on the engine stand, get this one down. I need to put the new oil pump and pickup on this one and get the oil pan situated, get a little bit of oil in it, and then I need to take this drive, which it's just hand tight right now. This is the oil pump drive because it's not got a distributor. Pull this out and prime the oiling system once I get a little bit of oil in it. Then I can reseal the oil pump drive, torque all that to spec, and be able to get the intake manifold and all that stuff put on. So anyways, let's keep at it. Well, we've got our new long block up on the stand, and looking things over, everything looks really decent inside. So far I'm pretty happy with the overall quality of the reman. Nothing standing out, nothing looks like it's been damaged in shipping, no gouges in the block or in any of the caps from being knocked around or anything like that. One thing I have noticed is this right here, which looks kind of out of place, and that's because this lower section right here doesn't exist on the original rear timing cover. I'm guessing they added that in for some reason. It doesn't look like it's going to hit anything, so I think we'll be okay. So, as you can see, it looks kind of out of place, but I don't think it's going to interfere with anything. If it does, I will trim it off like the factory piece is. Just right here above the bolt on this side, right here above the bolt on this side, and just delete this bottom section, which it won't cause any issues. So I'm not sure why they've put that on there. But anyways, next up, I need to get the oil pump mounted, the oil pump pickup and drive put in place, and then we'll be ready to set the oil pan on. So I went on and bought a Melling oil pump pickup. It's a 127S, if you need to know the part number. The oil pump pickup had to be replaced to maintain the warranty. Sometimes you can clean them, but for what it is, and on this engine, it's kind of expensive. It's like a $45 part. But yeah, go on and replace it, get your warranty. Next up, we've got to drop the oil pump drive shaft down into place, which it goes right down that hole there. Now, you'll notice there's a little collar on this that sets the depth or holds this in place depth-wise. The factory pin, as you can see here, it is the same. Now, the short end is what was inside the block, so the short end of the pin needs to go down, like so. Then we'll get our gasket in place, get the oil pump and pickup put in. To make assembling everything easier, I went on and popped the oil pump drive out of the top side of the block, which this is basically just the bottom section of a distributor, which is driven by that, what normally would be called a balance shaft. It is the distributor slash oil pump drive. So that's what that gear off on the right hand side of the timing system is. So I knocked this out of place, and next we'll get our oil pump set on with the pickup already bolted in place, because I don't believe they can go in separately. So yeah, we'll get that on next. So we've got our oil pump pickup all put into place, ready to go. So next up, I'm gonna come through, I'm gonna take a razor blade and trim this little gasket protrusion off on both sides, make sure everything's flush. Then what I like to do with these oil pan gaskets or seals, take a little black RTV, put it in all the corners and all the areas where you have, oh hey, look at that. That was folded over. That would have probably caused a leak. So be sure to clean all this up. But all these split areas right here, put a line of RTV across them. Same for back here where the gasket's going to meet these corners. Put a little RTV in both corners. And that should prevent us from having any leaks down the road. So I'm going to go on, get the oil pan. I'm going to go on and get the oil pan cleaned up and get the new oil pan seal put in place, and we'll get it all bolted up and torqued to spec. So I caught a small problem right here. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but this cover right here is proud of the oil pump flange or oil pan flange on the block by probably a 1/16 of an inch. And on this side, it is low, about 1/16 of an inch. That's going to cause a leak eventually. So, in order to fix this, I'm going to have to pull this hub back off, pull this cover back off. Keep in mind, this was installed during remanufacturing of the engine. I have not touched this piece, so I'm going to have to see if I can loosen the bolts for it and move it just a little bit to get it to sit flat so we don't have any leaks down the road. And hopefully it hasn't torn up the gasket or anything, which I've noticed that the gasket's right here, and it looks like it's not in the best of shape. So I have a feeling, well, I'm hopeful that it won't cause a problem down the road. It looks like they've used some kind of gasket adhesive on it or what have you. So maybe if I'm careful with it, I can get a little movement out of it. You can see around the bolt head that it's got some space to go downward. It might have got knocked around a little bit in shipping or something like that. So we'll see, just something to look out for. I'm gonna pull all this stuff back off and see if I can fix it. I was able to loosen the bolts up. I pulled that hub, pulled the timing cover back off. Was able to sneak a wrench in and loosen that stud up a little bit. Loosen the bolts up over on this side. And I'm able to move it just a little bit. So I'm gonna trim this gasket off on top, lay something flat across here, and snug this bolt up over here. Do the same over there. And that should fix the problem, and it shouldn't be enough movement to damage the gasket underneath it. So I think we'll be all right there. So I was able to get everything loosened up and got everything snugged back down. We're nice and flush there now. And we are good here now too. So I'm still going to, like I said, I trimmed the gasket off up there. I'm going to run a light skim of RTV across both those gaps before I put the oil pan on, and a dab in all the corners to prevent any future leaks. But I think that will, I think that'll fix that problem. We'll see. Hopefully that's the case. I did take pictures of it, and I'm going to let them know when I go do the paperwork for the warranty on this engine, and let them know that that was an issue right off the bat. And if we have any leaks or anything come up from that, hopefully the warranty will pay for it and pay for the labor. So anyways, we will keep going. So we're back together how we were, and now we are set up to prime the oil system. Already got a little more than 4.5 quarts of 1030 conventional in the crankcase. I don't see anything dripping. I have not spun the oil pump up yet, but I got a pressure gauge set up from the plug on the back of the head because I had already put the oil pressure sender in the regular location. So pulled the plug out of the back of the head. I'm running it off that point. But yeah, now we're going to prime it up and see how it does. And for that, let's see here. For that, I do not have a special tool. All I've got is a long 1/4 inch extension and an 8mm shallow socket. It is locked on the extension, so it will not fall off. I'm going to run it right down in on top of the oil pump drive. Make sure she locks on. And spin it up. Oh yeah, there it goes. "62 pounds of oil pressure." almost immediately. So I'm just going to run this for maybe a minute or two and check everything over for leaks, see if I see anything, and yeah, that'll hopefully flush any particulate or any contamination that's in the motor down to the oil pan, get it trapped in the filter. I will run this oil for the initial startup and the break-in. What I like to do on fresh engines like this, especially ones that I haven't put together, I will heat cycle it basically on the first oil that's in the with the first oil. It may run 10-20 minutes, get it up to temperature, get the thermostat open, and then I will shut it down and let it cool down. While it's cooling down, I will go on and change the oil and the filter out, and that's just to remove any contamination from this engine that was done during transport or during the rebuild process. And then we will run that second oil change, either 100 or 200 miles. The manufacturer of the engine suggests the first oil change at 500 miles. I like to do it a little sooner than that. So I'll probably, I'm going to drive this customer's truck back and forth to work for a couple days just to check everything over and make sure we're good. But yeah, so 200, maybe 300 miles in, we'll service it out again. And then he should be good to go the first 1,000 miles after that, and we'll service it out again. After that, we can step it up to 3,000 mile oil changes, and after the first 3,000 mile oil change, we can swap out to a synthetic oil if he wants. But yeah, let's keep going. Well, I think we've got her buttoned up to a point where it's ready to go in the truck before we go any further. I'm going to leave the exhaust manifold off until it's in the truck. I think it'll just make it easier to get things in. I taped off the lower intake. I'm going to leave the upper off because a lot of the harness has to come up through this intake manifold. I want to just leave me some room to work. It's pretty easy to bolt that on once it's back in the truck. But I've got all the hoses routed. That is for the crankcase vent. I've got all our sensors in place. I think we are pretty well ready to go. I've been keeping an eye on things since doing the oil pressure test on it, essentially, or priming the oiling system. Haven't seen anything leaking. And yeah, I think we are good. I've spun the engine over now a couple times by hand. Everything feels good there. I went on and slid this back in place, torqued it down 100 foot-pounds. But yeah, it's got all the plugs in it, so we should be pretty well ready to go. I've got some piles of miscellaneous parts down here yet. Alternator, some bracketry, some the tensioner and stuff for the serpentine drive. The front crank pulley, which actually I can go on and put this in, or put this on now. I do need to go get a new PCV valve for it because the one listed for this truck is not correct. So the one I keep finding has 2 ports coming off of it. So I need to go run down and just match this one up, which isn't a big deal. I'll do that maybe tomorrow, we'll see. I do need to pull a couple bolts off and get this mounted back in place like so. It's our engine lifting bracket. But yeah, other than that, I think we're pretty good. So with that said, I'm gonna wrap this part up here. If you've got any comments, questions, complaints, drop them in the comment section below. If you want to support the channel, there's a PayPal account set up. Link to that is in the description. We've got SuperThanks enabled as well, so you could go that route too. If you would, hit that like button. It really helps us out. And yeah, if you haven't already, please subscribe. We appreciate you watching. Next time you see this, we'll hopefully be back in the truck and getting ready to run.